I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the most haunted city on earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And I'm JT Timmons.
And today we are going to be doing our first public fix, which is typically exclusive for the Parajunkies. So the Parajunkies, as they know, and those who are listening to us on the live stream right now, typically we do these as our more unhinged episodes. We talk about various topics of paranormal that are going on. We talk about different investigations we go on privately, all sorts of things.
We tend to goof off a little.
Yeah, it's a little bit more unhinged. And so it's a lot of fun, but this time we're going to be doing this deep dive as a fix, and if you enjoy this, maybe it's a great time to consider becoming a Parajunkie because we do these all the time.
All the time.
Which is super fun.
Oh, yeah.
But yes, with that though, welcome to the fix.
Ghosts are like heroin. You're chasing after that first experience. You're chasing after the elation of learning a new dynamic about the universe. Vast, untapped universe of possibilities that life goes on, that there's more to it than what we feel and see, that you could conceivably go on forever.
Welcome to the fix.
Yes, welcome everybody. And today we are going to be discussing our upcoming investigation. When you guys are seeing this, more than likely we are either going to be investigating the next day or that day exactly. We're going to be investigating the old Tondee's Tavern, which is now Bubba Garcia's at 7 East Bay Street. And as we always do when we do investigations, we try to pull up as much information as possible and bring it to you so that we kind of have an idea of what we're working with historically about the place so that we know what kind of spirits we might be encountering as well. So let's just dive right on into it. So remake Tondee's Tavern, because that is important to note with this particular situation. There is an original Tondee's Tavern that we'll talk about in just a second. And
I actually did an investigation in the basement of the original Tondee.
Really?
Yeah.
That's super cool. And then we have the remake Tondee's Tavern that is now Bubba Garcia's. That's the one we're going into. But we are going to talk about the original as well, just so you have a little bit of context of why this building was important. But the remake Tondee's Tavern was built, and it stands originally housed in a different building because this is Savannah, so it's very nuanced. That building burned during the Great Fire of Savannah on January 11th, 1820, due to the Boone's livery stable catching fire and basically burning the entire town of Savannah to the ground.
More or less, yes.
It's called
More or less.
Booze?
Boons.
Boons. I like it said booze livery stable.
Boons.
Yeah, everybody goes to booze.
You know, boo.
Booze.
But yes, that was the cause of the Great Fire of Savannah. Very, very important to most of the city's history because it affected most historic buildings in some form or manner. But historic Savannah only has records of the new building, the one that we're going into, that dates back to 1857. But there are tax records that show that it was built earlier in 1853. So technically, the new building on 7 East Bay Street was never the original Tondee's Tavern. That version of Tondee's was opened as an honoring of the original that held so much history, including moments that impacted the American Revolution. So
Yeah, the Sons of Liberty would meet there.
Exactly. So the original Tondee's Longhouse was established and constructed by early Savannah settler Peter Tondee. And here, if JT has it, the fuggliest photo of all time. And we'll make sure we include it in the video, y'all. But
not everyone had a master artist on hand to, represent them and make portraitures. This guy had, I'm going to say, an 8-year-old with a pastel crayon set.
Exactly. It's not great. And it stood on the corner of Broughton and Whitaker Street here in downtown Savannah, which is now a locally owned coffee shop called Coffee Fox.
Intriguingly enough, it actually is a little behind that because the streets have changed and moved around a bit. It's actually where it's where Flock to the Walk is.
Oh, it extends all the way back there. Wow.
Yeah. It was kind of this long. It was a long house, a long building that ran that way, but it was a little further back from what we see as Broughton Street today, and it was almost like the very end of City Market, kind of.
There you go. If you want to see the plaque, though, for it, it's posted right next to the front doors. Yeah. And it says, on this site stood in colonial times Tondee's Tavern, where gathered the Sons of Liberty. Now, Tondee's Tavern was constructed anywhere between 1766 and 1770 on land granted to him by Savannah's local council, and it held immense significance during the American Revolution. His skilled carpentry and political connections in colonial America made him and his tavern a prominent figure in the revolutionary movement. And Savannah in general doesn't get enough attention for its impact on the revolution that it should in a lot of ways, at least historically. But now, originally, Tondee served as the heart of early Savannah social life. It was a gathering place for both young and old where they would come to enjoy drinks, listen to captivating tales from docked sea captains, and participate in a colonial ring toss game called quoits.
We played quoits.
We played quoits.
Everybody, let's go down and play some quoits. I got a quoit. Ring. Is that what it is? Ring?
Yeah, it's a ring toss.
We're tossing the quoits. This is what early Savannahans sounded like.
They sounded like this, and we
They
just
sound
threw
like
rings.
this. Hey, let's throw some rings. We'll throw the quoits.
Tro?
Throw.
Throwing them?
Hey, this is early Savannah dialect right here. Hey, get off of my back.
They sound like trolls. That's what it is.
Basically.
But as the revolution gained momentum, Tondee's Tavern became the epicenter of revolutionary activities, such as on August 10th, 1774, delegates from every parish in Georgia convened at the tavern, marking the commencement of numerous revolutionary meetings held there. On July 4th, 1775, Tondee's Tavern played a pivotal role in establishing the first independent government of the state of Georgia. Revolutionary operations by the Sons of Liberty in Georgia continue to be headquartered at the tavern until the British occupied the city in 1778. And even after the war's end in 1782, the revolutionary government continued to convene at the tavern. Now, Peter Tondee passed away in 1775, but his wife Lucy continued to operate the tavern until her own passing in 1785. Now, where the new Tondees, where we're going, 70 Space Street.
It's not even Tondees anymore.
It's not even Tondees anymore either. It is now Bubba Garcia's, but we'll still call it Tondees for historic sake. And honestly, most people know the building by being Tondees.
It's
even
true, although
still.
it wasn't Tondees when I got here. I think it was a barbecue place.
It's been a restaurant of many forms.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah. Because it was the only place that had beef ribs for a long time, so I used to love to go there.
Mm-hmm. And so the building where this new Tondees was located was owned by Central Railroad and Banking Company way back in the day. And that's where our story is mostly. But what many people of the time did not understand was the magnitude of suffering that would occur inside and around 7 East Space Street.
Absolutely.
And going into this investigation, I think that's a really key point here. Though horrible things did happen in the building, it was especially the land around this area because it was kind of the epicenter of slave trade in Savannah.
Oh, absolutely. Like
within that
you would
one
imagine
block.
that even the notion that souls were being bought and sold and marketed by the stroke of a pen in that building.
Right.
That someone was writing over these ownership papers, and that there was, it is nightmarish to think about.
It's very disturbing, and it only gets worse. So lock in, everybody. To paint the setting for you, Savannah was a major commerce center for the South in the 1850s due to our booming port industry especially. But River Street to Bay Street, that corridor was bustling with merchants, carriages on cobblestone streets, sailors, and a sinister underbelly. Now, most of this thriving economy was built off of the backs of those who were blatantly disregarded in public settings, referring to slaves who were hard at work building the city's empire in the cotton trade and other various trades as well. Now, slaves were treated as property, not humans, during this time period. And most of you who have ever taken a U.S. history class are probably familiar with this, but nonetheless, they would be akin to almost like buying a horse in that way. They were treated as that level of value, essentially. Slave trade also became a form of entertainment for some. Now, the same way that we find pleasure watching shows like Storage Wars or what have you, where you get the dopamine rush of seeing who wins the highest bid, citizens would gather and revel at these slave auctions for the same reason, which would typically occur in Johnson's Square. Now, by 1790, enslaved African people made up more than 3/4 of the population in Chatham County, where Savannah is located, which is insane. That is a huge percentage of people. But the slaves didn't just arrive in Savannah with no owner. Most were owned by what were called commission brokers. Similarly functioning like real estate and bond brokers do nowadays, these men specialized in the buying and selling of any kind of property, like real estate, stock notes, bank notes, and slaves. Now, these brokers would sponsor local open auctions and would advertise private sales in the newspapers. They would also sell to local plantation owners, elite, etc., to profit a pretty high margin. Now, before the Atlantic slave trade agreement, the history of slave sales in Johnson Square, which would eventually pivot the manner of slave sales, most slaves were sold from 1790 to 1865, and that would happen at the Chatham County Courthouse on Wright Square. So it is important to dictate, just for historical purposes, that it wasn't always originally Johnson Square. That was more for after the Atlantic Trade Agreement, when they were kind of having to be a little bit shadier about it. And we'll get into that. But when it was happening on Wright Square, there would be a monthly sheriff sale, which would eventually turn into all estate-related sales, which it would include slaves because they were considered property of whoever. And these sales would occur in both the 1733 and 1833 versions of the courthouse because, buildings changed, but they kept the same intention there. Now, here's an excerpt actually from a journal of a boy who attended one of these auctions, so we can kind of see a little bit into the mindset of people attending these. But when I was 9 years of age, father took me down to see the slave trading post where he purchased a house girl for mother. She, having had considerable trouble with the white girls who went out to work, there was a high platform which partially surrounded the Chatham County Courthouse, upon which the slaves were placed for sale. We looked them all over until presently we saw one who looked as if she would be just the one we wanted. "Hey, what's your name?" asked father. "Elsie, sir," answered she. "What's that scar on your leg and that scratch on your face?" continued father as he gave her the once over. "That scar on my face is where my missus hit me with the stirrup, and I ran away from her. This here hole on my leg is where a snake bit me, and I took a knife and cut the bite out. And boss, if you buy me and be good to me, I promise to work till I die," screamed old Elsie. And so Elsie was our choice, and father paid $2,500 for her in Confederate money. As we took her down off the platform, a storm of voices filled the air saying, buy me, boss, please do," while thin black arms waved to us as we drove off with old Elsie on the back seat of our carriage. William H. Ray, and it's undated. So yeah, if that gives you any look into the mindset of how these went about, it was really almost a thrilling experience for these people, not for the people being sold, but for those who are purchasing. And also, while we're into the little portion of quotes, there's going to be a few more quotes throughout this episode. I am going to redact some of the language that is used in some of these quotes because it is no longer appropriate to use these words. So I will be in place putting it as slave because it would have meant the same connotation. But now, after 1865, Savannah newspapers stopped running notices of sales at the courthouse due to control by General Sherman's cavalry. And that was mostly because they weren't supposed to be doing this. And so a quote from the Savannah Republican on January 6, 1865, "In front of the courthouse in this city, there has been for many years a number of tables which were used by slave brokers as auction blocks for the display and sale of slaves. The stands have disappeared with the advance of civilization, Sherman's army, and have been used to warm abolition bodies." Now, in 1798, Georgia followed the lead of other southern states and banned the international slave trade under the Atlantic Trade Agreement in order to cut off the supply of kidnapped Africans and inflate the value of those already enslaved in the state. So though it looked like they were stopping the problem, they were really just, the call was coming from inside the house, basically.
Good way of putting it.
Yeah. As a consequence, Savannah became a central hub in the domestic slave trade. And now when it came to commission brokers in Savannah, not all of them chose to deal with the sale of slaves, but the ones that did were diabolical and seemed to almost entirely all work on the same block. And some of these were named, and these include John S. Montmillan, George W. Wiley, William Wright, T.J. Walsh, J.A. Stevenson, David R. Dillon, Charles Augustus Lafayette Lamar, but arguably the worst of all, the namesake for Bryan Street that, well, as what it more than likely is because it's still a little murky due to other Joseph Bryan that exists in our history.
Right. We're not certain.
But being that it ran right in front of his office, it makes a little sense.
And very likely familial.
Exactly.
At the very least.
Very least, yes. And so the namesake for Bryan Street that runs directly through Johnson Square was Joseph Bryan. Now, these are a little bit of a diagram of what Derby Ward would have been. And wards were basically almost like little communities. That's the best way to describe it in Savannah.
Right. Most people think of Savannah as laid out in squares. They're actually laid out in wards, with squares being the center part of them. And each would kind of operate independently and allow trade between the wards. And this way, the interior politics of Savannah ran like a mini consortium of towns and townships. Each ward, that's why we have so many churches. There's a church on almost every square, because each square was representing a populace of its own.
Mm-hmm. And so the two particular buildings that we're going to talk about the most would be on the purple and yellow one. That would be 83 and then 90. Well, 82 and 83 kind of, because it's a little bit of a wonky depiction of it. But on some of the other ones, though, they basically are only separated by an alleyway. And that would be J. Bryan and Sons, which is Joseph Bryan's business, his broker business. And then in front of that would be Wright Yard, which is a really horrific place. And we're going to talk about that. So then, as we keep on going, now all of these men who were actively working in the slave trade purposely revolved their sales and offices around what was called Wright Slave Yard. The Wright Slave Yard, which is directly across the alley behind 7 East Bay Street on Bay Lane, it was a massive 60 by 90 foot holding pen used to hold slaves until auctions. And this is depicted on numbers of maps in Savannah history. And so there are even newspaper clippings of this particularly. But really, why this particular yard came into infamy is because of Joseph Bryan. This yard was originally owned by William Wright, but was eventually taken over by Joseph Bryan. And a quote of this is, William Wright, now owning all of Lot 7 and part of Lot 8, enclosed the area and used it as a slave holding yard. The property had a wooden frame building standing on the premises. And on December 1st, 1858, Wright sold the property, including the frame house, extending from the east side of the Merchants and Planters Bank building to Joseph Bryan. And that was from Seabury, site of the European House and Demolished Buildings Notebook, which is found at the Georgia Historical Society. Now, this building would become the Savannah Bank and Trust Co. building. The building was built in 1869. And it is currently being converted into a Ritz-Carlton.
It is. It'll be a woefully haunted hotel, people. So when you come, stay at the Ritz-Carlton and be woefully haunted.
And fun fact, JT and I used to have an office in this building.
You absolutely did.
Yes.
Yeah, we did.
Which is very disturbing. And it was a very creepy building.
Yeah, it's strangely, even in its design, it looks like something that if you wanted to tell a spooky story, you're like, in that building, occultists practice their craft. It doesn't help that the building also is like weirdly lit from the like top 4 or 5 floors, and they'll change the color sometimes. And you'll be like, why is that building glowing red at me? I don't understand.
Yes. And so Joseph Bryan, before acquiring Wright Yard, was a smaller broker operating at 117 Bay Street as J. Bryan and Sons before taking on a lease in the Central Railroad Bank building. The purchase of Wright Yard is what launched his career. And the same day that he bought Wright Yard, he published 3 advertisements. He skipped no beats. Here, I'll try to make out the reading of this, but this is a newspaper clipping that says, slaves for sale by J. Bryan, a first-rate brick mason, an excellent cook and house servant, a fine seamstress, lady's maid, and also several field slaves. And so he published that. For sale, a lady's maid and child's nurse, also an excellent seamstress. And then for sale, slaves and families and single, which is such a disturbing advertisement.
It's very upsetting.
It's
very upsetting, especially because it comes across as just like
So
a trip to the
nonchalant.
grocery store, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's like, you could take a 6-pack or you could take a single. This is so disturbing that this was, the condition of our psyche.
And that was published in the Savannah Morning News on December 9th, 1858. Now, slaves, when they arrived to Savannah, were often temporarily housed in commercial brokerage houses, including the basement of 70 East Bay Street, where we are going to be investigating, Wright Yard, or the basement of Pulaski Hotel, which is now a Regions Bank.
Oh, okay.
Which was also the Savannah Hotel at one time. It's where Gracie.
Yep, that's where Gracie
was. Watkins lived.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, really messed up place besides Gracie. But, but predominantly for Joseph Bryan, he was keeping people either in the basement of his building where he was leasing out his office or in Wright Yard. And mostly if it was in Wright Yard, it was because of overflow.
Right.
Now...
Yeah, and in a lot of those cases, one of those things that comes up again and again, because they talk about the yard a lot, where they basically penned in slaves. A lot of times they wouldn't keep them there overnight, or they wouldn't keep them there. There's a lot of speculation that they were being kept in tunnels or kept in basements, partially to keep them from planning an escape or thinking of escape, and partially so that people wouldn't come and either injure them or do things of that nature. So it's very peculiar because there just isn't a lot of history that we can really look at. We are pulling from scraps of newspapers, but there's not a detailed.
There's no detailed timeline of how these things went down. especially because after that Atlantic trade agreement, it was kind of shady dealings.
It really was. It was very difficult to determine whether or not you were adhering to the trade agreement or you were basically sending marauding slave traders to just kidnap people off the coast and come back with them. Which was it created an interesting dynamic of stories where there were so many cases where it's like, oh, you know what, the domestic slave trade is dealing with generational slaves versus these very strong-willed, strong-bodied people who are like, you kidnapped me.
Exactly.
And it's like people can't fathom it today, but having a system that was designed to really break a person down,
break their spirit,
their spirit, it takes time. It takes, yeah.
And here's also an image of a very disturbing entryway to get down to one of the holding pens.
It is a classic stop on a lot of ghost tours to look down the staircase that would have just deposited you out into that slave holding pen.
Exactly. Now, Joseph Bryan would often use his basement as overflow, as I said, and he would sell slaves until his death on December 5th, 1863. But fear not, we're going to talk more about this demon. And so here's Joseph Bryan's headstone. He was born on January 25th, 1812, which is ironic because the other Joseph Bryan died in 1812 as well.
He died the very year that this one was born.
Isn't that weird?
That is
odd. Very weird.
Yeah.
Maybe he's a vampire.
Ooh, that's
maybe he
interesting.
Just switched personas there.
Yeah.
That's interesting, yeah.
And so, no, Joseph Bryan's highest profit was his sale of the Great Slave Auction at the Butler Plantations, a.k.a. the Weeping Times.
The Weeping Times.
Which is, in my opinion, one of the most disturbing parts of Savannah history that you can bring up. And not a lot of people know about it because the historic marker for it is on the outside of the downtown district. Because technically this didn't take place downtown because it was too many people. And we'll talk about that. But there is a photo of the historic plaque. And so it says, one of the largest sales of enslaved persons in U.S. history took place on March 2nd to 3rd, 1859 at the 10 Broke Racecourse, a quarter-mile southwest of here. To satisfy his creditors, Pierce M. Butler sold 436 men and women and children from his Butler Island, which, yes, he had a whole island that he kept these people trapped on, and Hampton Plantations near Darien, Georgia. The breakup of families and the loss of home became part of African American heritage remembered as the Weeping Time. The event was reported extensively in the northern press, and reaction to the sale deepened the nation's growing sectional divide in the years immediately preceding the Civil War. Now, we have some different news clippings that were advertising this, and all of it's, again, very nonchalant, very like, oh, it's very much so giving big auction, big like estate sale.
Right. Almost the excitement of having, spectacle,
Well, and people traveled from all over the country to attend this. A lot of people from Louisiana, a lot of people from Virginia, a lot of those other territories that had high plantation rates and stuff because there was enough
Which
land.
even drove that Weeping Time story even further because these families were being separated, and some of them were being separated by incalculable distances.
Exactly. And it was the largest sale of slaves in Southern history. The slaves could be viewed and inspected before the auction, and some may have even been held on the premises of Bryan's slave yard on Johnson Square, being that Bryan Johnson was Joseph Bryan, was in charge of handling these people. And so the advertisement stated the slaves will be sold in families and can be seen on the premises of Joseph Bryan in Savannah 3 days prior to the day of sale when catalogs will be furnished. Now, they said that they would sell people in families, but that was not how that went down.
That is not what happened.
And so a quote that says, "The office of Joseph Bryan, the slave broker who had the management of the sale, was thronged every day by eager inquiries in search of information and by some who were anxious to buy," Thompson later reported, who was a reporter from up north. And for several days before the sale, every hotel in Savannah was crowded with slave speculators from North and South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Alabama, and Louisiana. Just think about that. Yeah. This packed every hotel in Savannah. Bryan was described as the correspondent by the correspondent as a dapper little man wearing spectacles and a yachting hat, sharp and sudden in his movements, as earnest in his language as he could be without actually swearing, though acting much as if he would like to swear a little at the critical moment.
Wow.
So he's a loser. And yes, and then there is a photo as well of Pierce Butler and his wife at the actual Weeping Times.
That's a photo of them at
the Weeping Times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow.
And so
that's wild.
It's disturbing. It's a really disturbing situation. Yeah. And if you want to hear more detail about the Weeping Times, we did an episode with a man who is a local tour guide, and he gave a very thorough breakdown of the Weeping Times as well. So you can dig back into the archives for that one too. But with 436 slaves listed to come onto the block, the proceedings were too large to be carried out in the isolation of Butler Island, and even too large to be carried out in Savannah. The event was conducted at the Timbrook racetrack 3 miles west of town, the only venue large enough to accommodate it. And the Timbrook course was constructed in 1856. It held its maiden horse race, because it was a horse racing track, in January of 1857. It also served as host for the annual fair of the Agricultural Club of Chatham and Effingham County, which allotted its fine enclosure, halls, stables, etc., for the convenience of exhibitors and visitors, said the Republican on October 27, 1857. Now, the event was held in March of 1859, however, was unique. It was referred to at the time as the Great Sale, and it's true, there was nothing else to compare to this. But during the day of the sale, Joseph Bryan was in charge of feeding the slaves and keeping them in good condition. The slaves were kept in horse barn stalls, and all family members were put in the same stall, which had hardwood floors and nothing to sit on. The slaves were given small portions of rice, beans, and sometimes cornbread to eat over the 2 days. A dismal and enduring rain would occur on Wednesday, March 2nd, and Thursday, March 3rd, 1859, and the Great Sale was better remembered by history and by those who endured it as the Weeping Time. So though it was a very tragic event, it was not called this because people were in tears. It was because even nature was disappointed in this act of cruelty. It was an unrelenting rain the entire time. And so the total proceeds for the Butler family estate sold, it brought in $303,850, which is the equivalent to $10 million today, for 429 men, women, and children. Upcharging for slaves who had skills such as rice growing, being able to utilize cotton or build. As the partings between the slaves and the Butler family occurred, Thompson Pamphlet, which is the news periodical from up north that we were talking about, recorded a throng of Butler's former slaves gathering around their former owner as he bade them farewell and gave them each one of the parting gift of a silver dollar. How kind. So sweet. As Thompson remarked that every slave he had sold who presented his claim for the paltry pittance, he gave the stipend of $1 whole dollar. Now, a little bit of side piece of history that does make a difference in our investigation is during the Civil War, specifically during Sherman's occupation of Savannah, 70 Space Street was used by General John Geary of the Union Army, who commanded the city of Savannah after its surrender. He confiscated it to act as the city headquarters during the Civil War under General Geary. And so Sherman had full control of this building at one point. Now that we've gone through all the history, some of the hauntings, which is a very interesting point when it comes to this building, because a lot of the talk of hauntings within this building are very word of mouth, which is not usual for Savannah. There's not a lot of properties that don't have things written down, pen to paper when it comes to hauntings. But for some reason, Tondee's got the pass. And so since the opening of the new Tondee's Tavern on Bay Street, strange occurrences and unusual sounds and disturbances have been reported. Even the owner of Bubba Garcia's that we talked to when we went to go view the space, he said every single person who works in that building has had something.
They just accept,
something happened to them. And so even before the new establishment opened, when the building was a Tony Roma's Italian restaurant.
That's it, Tony Roma's.
Oh, okay.
They had great beef ribs.
Okay.
There you go. Temperatures would drop and lights would flicker, particularly on the lower floor.
Yeah, I remember talking to the waitstaff about it, asking if there was any hauntings there, and they were like, "This place is so haunted, you wouldn't believe it."
Wow. I'm so excited to investigate it.
Yeah, I'm nervous to be in there after dark, personally. But one night, now this is probably the most notorious story attached to Tondee's, because this happened to two of the employees at Tondee's, and the owner caught a video that he found interesting. So much so that he called in Eat It and Like It to write an article on it.
No way, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, which is super interesting. Now, one night, a fire broke loose at Tondee's.
Oh, yeah.
And
I remember that.
Yeah, which is crazy. It was credited to a cigarette butt being improperly disposed of in a flower pot outside. But two employees who had closed that night were spending the night to save time for the opening shift the next day. I guess that happened often, where they would just stay the night there so they could just get to work instead of having to go back and forth. But at 3 a.m., one of the employees, Lisa Scrogen, was abruptly awoken. She explained it was as if someone had touched her in her sleep, like as if someone was waking her up. Oh. And so upon awakening, she heard the terrifying scream of her coworker. The two of them had discovered the fire. They quickly extinguished the flames with buckets of water and returned to sleep. Their nerves were shaken, but they were safe. It wasn't until the following day when the security cameras were reviewed, because they apparently had security cameras installed that would face the front door, which would see the flower pots out front. But when they were reviewed, they discovered something unusual. It appeared like small orbs were captured flying across the camera in various shapes and sizes. Some appeared as flashes of light, while others appeared more concrete. None had any distinct patterns to their movement, and the two already startled employees were stunned. Coupled with the abrupt awakening that Scrogen experienced, it seems as if the spirits of this haunted tavern were trying to save the two innocent employees. Because it was a bad fire. I mean, it would have... knowing Savannah in general, fire burns very strange here.
Yeah, absolutely.
It would have caught the building on fire, almost guaranteed.
Yeah,
if it
and
was
the
left.
interior, I want to say, was a bunch of wooden booths. I mean, it might still be a bunch of wooden booths.
I think it is, yeah. And so, yeah, it was like a giant fire hazard, basically, waiting to catch. So now... figures of enslaved enslaved people are often seen, and they're almost residual reminders of the antebellum South, and are seen throughout the building, impressions etched into every fiber of the tavern. And so, too, have spirits dressed in Civil War clothing been reported lurking throughout the building, which is interesting as well, which would make sense, too.
Like Civil War era clothing, or... Okay.
Or Civil soldiers.
Soldiers.
Both is what I've read.
Okay.
So it would make sense, especially to see soldiers in Union attire because of it being a headquarters for Savannah, because we were under the occupation of Sherman for a very long time. So it's not like they spent a short little stint there, you know? Now, so we very well could encounter enslaved individuals. We could encounter Union soldiers. We could encounter also a woman named Catherine. Now, Catherine is quite the elusive figure. I could not find out why she is called Catherine. Maybe it was just an employee who named her Catherine. Maybe somebody who visited the restaurant got a feeling that her name was Catherine and it just stuck.
And that is oftentimes how these things happen, is somebody somewhere along the line just realizes or has the notion, oh, it's Catherine.
Exactly. And so Catherine is believed to be the spirit of a slave from the 1850s, and it's said to haunt the Tondee's Tavern / Bubba Garcia's. And back when Tondee's was in operation, she was known to mess with staff and visitors, moving their beer mugs or whispering into their ears.
That was one of the big things that I heard a lot, was the moving of drinks.
Yes.
Which was also very popular at Moon River Brewery, which is only like a block away. Mm-hmm. Or 2 blocks away.
And that would make sense because River Street, though it was, River Street and Bay Street, I should say, though they were both majorly intertwined with the merchant sort of industry, there were a lot of restaurants and taverns there too, because, you know, sailors got to eat.
Oh, yeah. And Savannah, I mean, it's weird to consider it tourism, but Savannah was a destination. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Savannah was kind of this like little pearl where even many plantation owners, and people don't think about this, that we didn't have plantations in Savannah, but a lot of plantation owners had homes in Savannah. So this was kind of where they would luxuriate, you know, where they would be in the town, where they'd be in the city, where they'd, you know, put on their fineries, because living out on the plantation is not much fun.
No.
Fiddly-dee.
No. And so they came into town to rub elbows with the elite, for sure. But voices are also sometimes heard, and disembodied whispers have been witnessed by those who work at Tondee's, well, the former Tondee's and now Bubba Garcia's, and those who patronize the restaurants. And one visitor to Tondee's talked about her experience and said, "It's like walking into a time capsule. You can sense the history and the energy stored in the building. While I was there, I sat down for a couple of drinks at the bar and waited for my friend to arrive. After a while, I checked my phone to see if she was okay, if she was on her way, you know, whatever was going on. That's when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around smiling because we hadn't seen each other in a long time. No one was there. I got this tap on my shoulder plain as day, and no one was behind me. It was a pretty relaxed day. It wasn't too busy. No one brushed up against me trying to move through a crowd. I have no explanation for what I felt that day. All I know is that Tondee's Tavern is haunted, like really haunted."
Wow.
You should have read that like a drunk sorority girl.
All I have to say is that Tondee's Tavern is haunted, like really haunted.
See?
Yeah.
I love it.
You have to like hold your puke back a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
That's the selling point.
Universally recognized.
And so people also claim to have intense emotional reactions from being in the basement, which I think will be very interesting. I mean, even when we went down there, you can feel it. It's just
being in the basement, just downtown, anywhere, you feel so uneasy. It always feels like the building's just going to collapse right on top of you.
Yeah, it does. It's because we don't have a lot of basements.
We don't have a lot of basements. The ground is not secure in Savannah. It's mushy. It's a swamp. All right. You don't build basements in swamps. Don't do it.
And so, last little bit though is some people have also experienced the spirit of a child that tends to hide behind the stairs in the basement.
They're always a creepy child.
Always got to be a creepy child.
Literally,
always. And the child hides behind the stairs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So we got to put a cat ball over there.
I don't know if you remember or ever saw the original Ghost Hunters where they went to Moon River
Oh, yes.
and they saw the little shadow figure at the end.
Yeah.
And the speculation was it seemed too small to be an adult.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it was like just taller than the pool table.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that episode. And Zach Bagans trying to get the ghost to push him down the stairs.
Oh, no, this was the Ghost Hunters.
Oh, it's Ghost
before
Hunters.
Ghost Adventures.
Gotcha.
So Ghost Hunters came here about a decade before.
Wow.
Is it a decade?
That would have been.
It was like 6 years before.
Yeah, it would have been a good
Maybe a decade.
bit of time before.
Because it was in their first season, I believe.
Okay, yeah. No, I remember that one as well.
Yeah.
I misheard. But still, go watch that episode of Ghost Adventures
Yes.
if you're looking
There's
for...
a lot of bro.
Bro. No, they literally get an EVP after he says, push me down the stairs. And it literally is a woman saying, I don't want to.
What is wrong with you? Get out of my house.
Literally. So yeah, it's heavy history.
It
but
is.
I think it's important to know these things when you go into an investigation because you can kind of cater and tailor your investigation to the possibilities of what could be there by knowing this history.
And if you believe in just the concept that energy can be stored in a location, then we're not even just talking about spirits, we're talking about a very concentrated suffering and a specific suffering that is not like any other. And so that brings us to this notion that we have a good chance of encountering basically a thought form of sorrow.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And just thinking about the number of enslaved people that moved through that building and even through it just to get to Right Yard, because you literally could go out the back door and head straight into Right Yard.
Yeah.
So just with that notion, you're going to see a lot of energy left behind from that. So I'm intrigued. I think it's going to be a really interesting investigation. I'm also very intrigued to investigate the second floor where Joseph Bryan's
Where his
office was.
Absolutely. And we've heard plenty of stories that it's just woefully haunted up there as well.
And I know when JT and Debria went to go get some shots for our trailer for this investigation, they were already having some experiences up in the second floor where cabinets were opening. What was it, like a closet door that opened on its own or something?
Yeah. I went and closed all the doors beforehand in the room because when I was getting the shots, I didn't want a bunch of open doors.
Right.
So I went through every single room, closed it because I wanted everything to look good and pristine, cinematic. So then I came back and put the camera in 4K 60, turned it on, not in that order, and then went in and what is that? That's going to be the most southwestern room. And it was trying to think. Yeah, it was closest to Novel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was closest to East Bryan Street. Yep. And one of the closet doors was open when I came back. And I was like, and then I shut it again to see if it would open again. And it stayed shut.
We're in for it.
We're in for it. So yes, join us everybody while we go for this investigation. We're going to live stream for the first 2 hours for the public. After that, it's going to be Para Junkies only. So you know where to find us if you want to continue with us all night long.
Yep.
And after this investigation, we are going to be going to Americus, Georgia. So expect another deep dive coming soon for that as well for the Rylander Theater.
Absolutely.
So we got a lot going on, but that is all we have for you today. We hope that you enjoyed today's episode whenever you're listening to this. And with that, my name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And stay spooky, y'all.